In September of 2024, we set off on an adventurous road trip that began with a flight into Salt Lake City, with a plan to visit 2 of Utah's Mighty 5, as well as Monument Valley in Arizona, and the southwest corner of Colorado.
Before we hit the highway, we wanted to make a stop for something that we can't get back home: In-N-Out. This was almost certainly the most picturesque drive-thru we've ever been in, but hot take, we didn't love it. If you're from the area, let us know what your usual In-N-Out order is in the comment. We also wanted to stop by a little unique spot outside of the Salt Lake City area.
The real-life Up House is built as an exact replica of the house featured in the movie. It is someone's private residence, so they do ask that you keep your visit brief, and I'll link their website down below so that you can read their rules if you'd like to visit. But as 2 people who love adventures just like Carl and Ellie, this was a fun spot to visit. Our next stop on the way was into Provo Canyon. This area is one of the first spots in Utah to see fall colors, and we were hoping to catch a glimpse before we headed into Bryce Canyon, which we knew wouldn't have much fall color to speak of.
We also stopped here to see Bridal Veil Falls, different than the one in Yosemite, but still impressive at 607 feet tall, falling into the Provo River. This was also a great stop because you can literally see the waterfall from the parking lot. You can walk across a short bridge to get a very up close and personal view. The rest of the drive to Bryce Canyon was an ever-evolving landscape of mountain views and rolling hills. The drive is about 4 hours, but since we made multiple stops, it took us most of the afternoon.
If you are approaching Bryce Canyon from the west or north, you will most likely drive through Red Canyon on Scenic Byway 12. This area falls under the National Forest Service, so there is no admission fee to enter, and we saw a lot of information saying this might be a better option for camping if you are having trouble finding reservations at the national park. Hotels and traditional lodging is also a little difficult to come by closer to Bryce. There are a few options outside of the park, and then there is the actual lodge inside the park, but that can be pretty expensive, especially during busy season.
We opted to stay at the Best Western Plus Ruby's Inn. Best Westerns are all independently franchised and operated, so sometimes you'll find yourself in a historic or iconic local hotel branded as a Best Western. It seems like this is a way that a lot of small local brands find help with managing their bookings and marketing. The Cowboy Buffet and Steak Room is open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and is usually pretty busy. The price was sort of reasonable for a touristy area, but the food was not much to write home about.
The hotel is named after the historic Ruby Inn, which began operating in 1919. The hotel today is run by the children and grandchildren of the original owner. The room was basic but fit our needs for the one night that we were here. The one thing we thought was weird was how small the pillows on the bed were, but maybe that's how they had them in the 1920s. We did like the historic photos in the room, which was a nice touch from the area. Just a little before sunset, we headed over to the park. Admission to the national park is $35, and it is usually good for up to 3 days in a row. Because of the different trips that we had planned this year, which included Bryce Canyon, Zion, and later this year, the Grand Canyon, we got the America the Beautiful Pass, which is good for 12 months and costs $80. So after 3 park visits, it is a good deal for the year.
Despite being specifically named Sunrise and Sunset Point, these are great spots for watching either the sunrise or the sunset from either location. This area is also the starting point for some of the park's most popular hikes. Because our visit was short, we didn't have a lot of time for different hikes, so we chose the Queen's Garden Trail, which is considered the least difficult of the trails descending from the rim into Bryce Canyon Amphitheater. The elevation here is about 6,000 feet, so it definitely was higher than we are used to, so that added a little bit of difficulty to the hike.
The main draw to Bryce Canyon is the visually striking, iconic hoodoos, the tall, thin spires of rock that rise dramatically from the canyon floor. Despite its name, Bryce Canyon is not technically a canyon, but a series of natural amphitheaters. The geology of Bryce Canyon is predominantly shaped by the sedimentary rock formations deposited 40 to 50 million years ago. These layers consist of limestone, mudstone, and siltstone, which were laid down in a vast freshwater lake environment. The pink, red, and orange hues of the rock layers are attributed to varying amounts of iron and magnesium oxides.
The hoodoos formed from a combination of weathering and erosion processes. You wouldn't think this area would see much snow, but due to the higher elevation, the winters here are pretty cold and contribute to the freeze-thaw cycles where water enters the cracks in the rock, freezes, and expands, causing the rocks to break apart. Over time, these processes sculpt the irregular spires, fins, and hoodoos for which the area is famous.
After the hike, we headed to the visitor center to pick up our magnet souvenir, and we always like to read a little bit of the educational info they have here. Bryce Canyon's high elevation, clean air, and remote location create some of the darkest skies in the country. We were able to see the Milky Way the first night that we were in the park, and although our astrophotography skills need a little work, we still captured some incredible images.
The main road through the park continues for another 15 miles along the southern Scenic Drive until it ends at the park's highest elevations at Rainbow and Yovimpa points. Along the way, we also stopped at Inspiration Point, which has some of the most spectacular views of the hoodoos. Our trip was in September, and this is towards the end of the busy season. We still found the park full of people, but it was not overly crowded to the point where we weren't able to enjoy ourselves. So, if you have the flexibility of travel time, I definitely suggest more of the shoulder season for a visit.
In the late afternoon of day 2, we left Bryce Canyon and headed toward Zion. A little more than halfway between the two, you'll find Mount Carmel Junction. This is where we stopped for dinner, especially after spotting a sign announcing that there were homemade pies here. It is a quirky diner-style restaurant inside a Best Western, believe it or not, but they have a fun story about a sign the owner's husband made during World War II. And due to the lumber shortages, he ran out of wood and couldn't finish the sign, so instead of saying home, it only said ho. But they decided that with people's accents, it basically sounded the same anyways.
rest of the drive only took us about 20 minutes, during which time we spotted a herd of bison, which are not naturally in this area like they are in Yellowstone, but these were in a ranch just beside the highway, and it was still pretty cool to see them all headed in for the evening. We, of course, had to stop by the park sign to grab a photo, and then enter the park. Zion sees over 4.5 million visitors per year, and it is immediately evident why. The landscape here is unlike anything we had ever seen before.
Zion has a lot more hotels and restaurants available in the area than Bryce Canyon does, but we opted for an Airbnb here, which helped us save a little bit of money over some of the hotel options. We got in late the night before, so we came in and dumped all our stuff everywhere before we were able to film, so there aren't any good clips of the bed or bathroom, but I'll link the listing below if you're looking for somewhere to stay while in Zion. It was quite nice and came with a little kitchen-y area to help maybe have a few meals in to save a little more. The host also offered tons of tips and answered a few questions as we were in the planning phases.
We saved another $35 on admission with our America the Beautiful pass. A word of caution for Zion: Zion is busy. Very busy in the summer months, but even still pretty busy during the lower season, like when we were here. Expect waits, traffic, and crowds most of the time. They have also implemented a bus system, but a little bit more about that later. For our first hike, we were able to get an early start and grab a parking spot near the trailhead. This is the Canyon Overlook Trail, a moderate 1 mile out and back trail. This is considered a moderate trail due to the elevation gain and a somewhat uneven terrain.
We had hiking poles for this hike, which were originally bought for a later hike in the Narrows, but we were glad to have them with us on this hike as well. The hike culminates in the view of Zion Canyon, and it is really the first time you could feel the true scale of this area. For our second hike of the day, we headed back to the visitor center and got on the park shuttle. The shuttle system in Zion is provided to reduce traffic in the park, especially given the limited parking in most of the trailheads. And during the busy season, the canyon drive is closed to private vehicles altogether. We studied the shuttle map and schedule before we went in order to understand our route, but it was pretty easy. We got on at the visitor center and we got off at the last stop, the Temple of Sinawava.
The Temple of Sinawava is the furthest stop down the canyon on the shuttle and is the only pathway to take to hike the Narrows. The hike begins with the Riverside Walk, a paved trail about 2.2 miles round trip. At the midpoint of the hike, you can begin your hike into the Narrows. Even if you aren't planning to hike the Narrows, this is a great hike to get a sense of the narrowing canyon walls. Hiking the Narrows is considered a bucket list item for a lot of visitors to Zion, and that was definitely true for us. This hike is considered strenuous on the National Park Service website, and it's crucially important to make sure you have the right gear and know the current weather conditions for the area. The risk of flash flooding is very high during the rainy season.
But I consider this kind of a choose-your-own-adventure hike. Once you enter the river, you can go as far as you are comfortable with, and if that's only 100 yards, you still got the experience of hiking in the river. I had read online that walking in the river was like walking on wet bowling balls, and that was the perfect description for what it was like. We used our hiking poles for stability, and we had our hiking boots with ankle support. We also bought neoprene socks on Amazon before the trip to help keep some water out. Our feet were absolutely soaked by the end, but that was kind of what we expected, so it wasn't too bad. There are also outfitters in town that rent gear for the Narrows, so if you don't already have sturdy boots or hiking poles, you can rent them while you're here.
After a few days of hiking and exploration in Utah, we headed towards Arizona, crossing off our 32nd state. Our first stop was at Glen Canyon Dam, the 710-foot-tall dam that flooded over 180 miles of the Colorado River to form Lake Powell. The dam also produces power, as the pressure forces water into large turbines that spin, generating electricity at about 5 billion kilowatt hours of electricity every year, which is enough to power nearly 500,000 U.S. households.
After this brief stop, we headed towards Page, which is typically where people make a stopover on their way to the Grand Canyon. We did not add the Grand Canyon to this trip because we are headed back to Arizona in a few months for a work conference, and decided to add it to that trip instead. But while we were in the area, we did stop at Horseshoe Bend. This is a 1.5-mile round-trip hike on a gravel path, but leads to an incredible overlook of, as the name suggests, a horseshoe-shaped canyon of the Colorado River, sculpted over centuries of erosion.
This area is on national park land, but the parking and trailhead are on city land, so there is a $10 parking fee. This area is also very popular and can be quite crowded at peak times, but with views like this, I could see why everybody wants to visit. We continued our drive for another 2 hours to reach the area of Monument Valley. This area sits on the border of Arizona and Utah, but is also on a Navajo reservation.
There are two main places to stay while in Monument Valley: the View Hotel and Golding's Lodge. We selected Golding's due to its interesting history as well as having a better price point. The room was basic but comfortable, but the wow factor really came when you opened the curtains and stepped out onto the balcony. Harry and Leon Golding purchased land and started the Golding's Trading Post in the 1920s. During the Great Depression, they saw an opportunity to bolster the local Navajo economy by bringing in movie production companies looking to film in the Southwest. With the growing popularity of Westerns, the owners met with director John Ford and convinced them to come to the area, and the filming of Stagecoach, starring John Wade, started production in Monument Valley very shortly thereafter.
Since then, Goldings has hosted film crews, photographers, artists, and tourists from around the world. The Trading Post has now expanded to include a lodge, a campsite, tour operation, restaurant, convenience store, and a private airstrip. They have preserved some of the history of the lodge and the surrounding area in the on-site museum. The next morning, we had breakfast at Stagecoach Restaurant. If you're staying here, plan on eating almost every meal here because there aren't a ton of other options in the area, with one exception, but more about that later.
We then headed to the tribal park to take the scenic loop drive through Monument Valley. The admission fee here is $8 per person. This is a 17-mile drive, only recommended for high clearance vehicles. The road is not paved and can be very rough and uneven at times. If you are not a confident driver, it may be better to look into a guided tour. The Welcome Center also has a lot of great information to read before starting the drive, as well as the popular overlook known as Photographer's Point. It's almost impossible to fathom the vast size of these buttes.
The settlers intended to lay claim to the best farmland and convert the Navajo to Christianity. They succeeded at the first task and failed at the second. Pushed out of the available farmland, the Navajo began raiding Spanish settlements. In return, the Spanish sent raiding parties into Navajo territory. These skirmishes continued into the mid-1800s when the United States took control of the area from the Spanish. This did not end up being a positive change for the Navajo. Soon, American settlers and the U.S. government began working in tandem to systematically force the Navajo off their land. As white settlers migrated westward and needed more and more land to farm or raise livestock, the government kept shrinking tribal borders to make room. The Navajo often fought back, of course, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. It's taught us that the rocks are alive. My great-grandpa would call them talking rocks. And in our culture, each of these mesas and these buttes, they have heartbeats.
Before starting our drive, we downloaded an audio guide to learn more about the geography and the history of the area. Along the drive, there are plenty of places to pull off and stop over for photos and closer views. The most famous stop in the park is John Ford Point, named after the director who frequently used this vista in his films.
We also took this opportunity to stop at one of the only other restaurants in the area, Linda's Fry Bread Cafe. Fry bread is a Native American bread that stretches back generations, particularly in the Navajo Nation, where it is thought to have originated. It is served plain or with powdered sugar, cinnamon, or salt and butter, or as a Navajo taco with meat and toppings. The geography of Monument Valley is characterized by towering sandstone buttes, mesas, and spires that rise dramatically from the flat, sandy landscape. The valley's vibrant red hues comes from the iron oxide in the rock, while its unique formations are the result of millions of years of erosions.
Some of the formations may seem very fragile and like they could crumble at any time, but the vast scale is actually very deceiving, and all of these formations are very sturdy and expected to last hundreds of thousands of years. After exiting the park, we headed to one of the other most famous filming scenes in the area.
I had run.
Fun fact, Forrest Gump is one of our favorite movies, so like many others who come here, we had to try and recreate this famous scene.
Quiet. He's gonna say something.
I'm pretty tired. I think I'll go home now. Leave us a comment and let us know how you think we did. Very close to Forrest Gump Point, you will also find Mexican Hat Rock Formation. This rock formation serves as the inspiration for the fictional Willie's Butte location in Pixar's Cars.
Another really interesting geographical area nearby is Gooseneck State Park. Similar to Horseshoe Bend, this area is one of the most striking examples of an entrenched river meander in the country. This park was also way less crowded than Horseshoe Bend, So that definitely makes it a selling point for us. After the few days we spent in Monument Valley, it was time to head towards Colorado for the next stop on our road trip. Along the way, we realized that we would be passing by the Four Corners Monument. This is the only point in the United States where 4 states share a border.
It was $8 per person to visit, and truthfully, at the same price as what you would pay to get into Monument Valley, this is pretty overpriced for just a few lines on the ground. But we did happen to buy our favorite souvenir of the trip here, and it was cute watching people pose for their photos, so why not? We then headed into Colorado towards our next destination of Durango. After getting checked into our hotel, we decided to spend the evening at the Durango Hot Springs. Colorado has 93 known thermal areas, including natural springs, all over the state. There is a long history of hot springs in this area, with some believing that the waters in natural springs enriched with minerals have healing properties. The Durango Hot Springs have multiple different pools, all with varying temperatures, so you can find one that's just right for you.
The next day, we headed downtown to board the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. The railroad runs both a diesel and a steam engine. The diesel train departs the depot first at 8:15 since it's faster, so we had time to grab coffee before our train left at 9. We always make it a point to visit local independent coffee shops when we visit a new place, and if you're here, it's definitely worth a stop at Durango Coffee Company.
The Durango and Silverton Railroad is a historic 3-foot narrow gauge railroad that operates on 45.2 miles of track between the historic towns of Durango and Silverton. The ticket prices for the round trip range from $110 to $225. The first class seats are reminiscent of the era of luxury train travel. The coach class is a vintage enclosed standard rail car, and we chose the third option, the open air gondola. Our trip was in the end of September, so temperatures were still pretty mild, but if you pick this option, it's worth bringing a jacket just in case.
So like the engine, they have a Thomas the Tank engine car that pulls the train. The Durango line was founded by the Denver and Rio Grande Railway in 1880. The railroad arrived in Durango on August 5th of 1881, and construction on the line to Silverton began in the fall of the same year. By July of 1882, the tracks to Silverton were completed and the train began hauling both passengers and freight. From the very beginning, the railroad was promoted as a scenic route for passenger service, although the line was constructed primarily to haul mine ores, both gold and silver, from the San Juan Mountains. It is estimated that over $300 million in precious metals has been transported over this route.
By 1885, the population of Silverton had grown to 1,100 people and the $1 Million Highway had finished construction, lessening the demand for the railway. Throughout the next 20 years, the railroad faced many challenges, including mudslides, floods, snow, war, and financial instability. When the U.S. government entered World War I, it assumed operation of the railroad, and again in World War II, the U.S. government requisitioned the narrow-gauge equipment to use in Alaska, and the smelter in Durango reopened to process uranium for use in the war.
In the 1960s, the Durango Silverton was registered as a National Historic Landmark and was also awarded as a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. And then, throughout the 1980s, the line continued to build on the scenic tourist railroad industry. Engines and coaches began to be weatherized for winter use, and major track reconstruction occurred as nearly 10,000 ties were replaced.
Locomotives number 497 and 480 were restored and returned to service, the number 497 being the only K-37 to run on the line, and the innovative rail camp was built for use in the summer. In 1985, the railroad purchased the Silverton Depot and returned it to service.
Today, the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad continues to provide year-round train service, operating a historic train with rolling stock indigenous to the line. The locomotives used to pull today's trains are either oil-fired or coal-fired, steam-operated, and diesel. The steam locomotives are 1923 to 25 vintage and are maintained in top condition.
We always opt for the steam engine when we take historic and scenic trail rides if available. It's always a unique experience and typically makes for much more dramatic photos and videos. The trip to Silverton takes about 3.5 hours, and I was initially worried that this would seem like a little long and maybe boring, but truthfully the time went by faster than we expected. You then stop for a 2-hour layover in the town of Silverton. In the 1870s, Silverton became the center of numerous mining camps located in the area. In addition to the miners, Silverton caught the eye of railroad companies in Denver, inspiring the Durango-Silverton Railway. During Silverton's early history, Blair Street developed into the red light district. And in May of 1883, a grand jury brought 117 indictments against lewd women, and the prostitutes were fined $5, plus the court costs. And dance halls that were open on Sundays were fined $25.
Although fines were levied, gambling and prostitution were generally accepted as long as the practice didn't migrate into the more respectable sections of town. Today, there is still a town ordinance on the books prohibiting curtains on saloon windows. The law wanted to see what was going on in those dens of iniquity. Nowadays, Silverton is nationally noted for its excellent preservation of such unique history and buildings, the scenic Highway 550, and the variety of shops, restaurants, lodging, camping, museums, and tours.
But as our layover was only 2 hours, there wasn't much time for saloons or lewd women, so we settled on visiting a local coffee shop before heading back to begin our ride back to Durango. Before heading back to the hotel for the evening, we stopped by one of the most popular spots in town, the Cream Bean Berry, for artisanal ice cream. It seems like this might be a railway tradition. The next day, we began our journey on Scenic Highway 550, also known as the $1 Million Highway.
As previously mentioned, we were here at the end of September and did this drive on September 29th. It turned out to line up perfectly with the peak of fall colors in the San Juan Forest. Highway 550 stretches from Durango through Silverton and ends in Ouray, known as the Switzerland of America. The 25-mile stretch from Silverton and Ouray is specifically referred to as the $1 Million Highway.
The highway was built in the late 1800s by road builder Otto Mears in order to support mining operations that had boomed in the area. It was later modernized for automobile travel in the 1920s. There are a couple of different theories as to why it is nicknamed the $1 Million Highway. Some say it was for the high construction cost, averaging $1 million per mile built, a significant sum of money today, but especially back then. Some say it's due to the supposed value of the gold-laden dirt used in its foundation, or it could be just because they were $1 million views. My favorite theory, though, is that people used to say, "I would not drive that highway even if you gave me $1 million."
The route is famous for its breathtaking scenery but has steep cliffs, hairpin turns, and lack of guardrails, making it both beautiful but also ranked among the most dangerous highways in the US. We downloaded an audio guide before the drive that guided us along the highway, giving us tips for where to make stops for scenic overlooks and giving us the history of the route.
Once we made it to the small town of Ouray, we stopped for lunch and then made our way to the Box Canyon Falls. Named as Ouray's own wonder of the world, the 80-foot-tall falls plunge through a narrow quartzite gorge surrounded by sheer cliff walls. The falls is quite powerful, especially in the spring, and the area is filled with a constant mist and roaring sound. This leg of our trip begins in Phoenix. We had the pleasure of staying at the Phoenician, a Marriott luxury collection resort. We did not pay for our stay here. Jeremy is lucky enough to work for a company that hosted a conference here, and I just tagged along to enjoy. This is a 5-diamond hotel, and the rooms range from $800 to $1,300. The main hotel offers a resort-style pool. We stayed over at the Canyon Suites, which also has a private pool for the suite guests only. The Canyon Suites are just a little ways away from the main hotel, separated by the cactus garden. According to the hotel, it showcases over 250 varieties of cacti and succulents.
Our room was spacious and comfortable with some really nice amenities. This is the kind of place that's just fancy enough that when the housekeeping comes in to clean, they organize the bathroom counter for you. I think maybe I enjoyed the view most of all. We had a direct view of the Phoenix airport and got quite a show at sunset.
Once Jeremy was done with his adult responsibilities, we spent more time exploring Phoenix outside of the hotel. First, visiting the Desert Botanical Garden. Admission is $33 per person, and this is a 140-acre garden dedicated to showcasing diverse plant life and desert environments, particularly in the Sonoran Desert. The garden was founded in 1939 by the Arizona Cactus and Native Flora Society, spearheaded by Swedish botanist Gustav Strack, who recognized the need to conserve and study desert plants. We were lucky to visit during the seasonal exhibit at the Butterfly Pavilion, where there are hundreds of butterflies fluttering around amidst the native plants.
Today, the garden is home to over 50,000 plants, representing more than 4,000 species from desert regions around the world. The collection includes cacti and succulents, including towering saguaros, prickly pears, agaves, and barrel cacti. When it was approaching dusk, we headed towards a popular spot to watch sunset, the Hole in the Rock, only about a 10-minute drive from the garden.
Hole in the Rock is a natural sandstone formation featuring a large eroded hole near its peak. Formed over millions of years by wind and water, it was likely used by the Hohokam people as a solar calendar. The site is popular at sunset and sunrise because it offers panoramic views of Phoenix and the surrounding desert. The hike to the top is short and an easy trail leading up to the hole. You can also climb through and perch yourself on the other side and sit back and wait for the show.
The next day, we headed towards Sedona. It took us about 2 hours to drive to Sedona from Phoenix. This area is known for its towering red sandstone cliffs, its scenic canyons, and lush forests, making this a wildly popular hiking destination. We were only planning on passing through for a short afternoon, so we downloaded an in-car tour guide which led us on a scenic drive and gave us a lot of interesting information about the area.
Beyond its striking scenery, Sedona is renowned for its spiritual significance, particularly the energy vortexes, locations believed to emit powerful healing energy. This spiritual energy also draws religious organizations to the area, resulting in the building of the Chapel of the Holy Cross. Many believe these vortex sites enhance meditation, self-reflection, and personal transformation, with each vortex spot said to have its own unique energy flows. While some describe physical sensations like tingling or warmth at those spots, others, like us, simply appreciate the peaceful and awe-inspiring landscapes. The Chapel of the Holy Cross is an iconic architectural landmark built directly into the Red Rock formations. It was commissioned by Marguerite Staud, a local artist and devout Catholic, who was inspired by the construction of the Empire State Building in the 1930s. The church is part of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Phoenix, but serves as a non-denominational place for prayer and reflection. The chapel is a popular spiritual and tourist destination offering breathtaking views of Sedona's red rock landscapes.
Sedona also has very strict rules for businesses in its town, requiring them to all comply with the color scheme of the area. This resulted in big, recognizable brands having to make changes to their typical storefronts and logos, like McDonald's here, that has only turquoise arches, rather than the typical golden arches that you would see anywhere else. We continued our drive on to the Grand Canyon, taking another hour and a half, headed towards a little snowstorm. It might sound a little odd to think of snow and Arizona together, but the south rim of the Grand Canyon, which sits at about 7,000 feet, gets an average of 50 to 100 inches, or about 120 to 250 centimeters of snow per year. Snowfall is most common from November through March, with occasional heavy storms blanketing the park. This part of our trip was in early November, so it was just a small dusting.
We stayed at the In History Grand Canyon location. It is in Williams, about an hour south of the entrance to the national park. The cabins were very comfortable and spacious with a little kitchenette. We loved that they also really embraced the essence of the area with a lot of the local and historic touches. The coolest part was the art pieces they had around. They all included a QR code that would take you to a website where you could read more about the works and how they're related to the history of the Grand Canyon. The next morning, we made the drive north to visit the park itself. It can be kind of confusing when looking at a map of the park, so for our trip, we programmed the GPS to take us to the park entrance, and then headed towards the famous Mather's Point. We next headed to the Grand Canyon Village, and then took the scenic drive down to the Desert View Watchtower. We used the same Action Tour Guide app, which we did in Sedona, at the park. It gave us both directions, must-see destinations, and historic information along the drive.
Welcome to the Grand Canyon National Park. As one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, the Grand Canyon offers some of the best views that nature has to offer. There are 3 versions of this tour, each with the same content but a different starting point. This version starts outside the park's south entrance. If you'd like to start in Canyon Village or at the east entrance, go ahead.
Admission to the Grand Canyon is similar to most national parks at $35 per car. If you saw our last videos, you know that we did both Bryce Canyon and Zion this year, so getting the National Park Pass made sense for us as they are only $80 for a full year of park admissions. Mather Point is one of the most popular and easily accessible viewpoints on the South Rim and is located near the Visitor Center, often making it the first stop for many visitors. The viewpoint offers breathtaking panoramic views of the canyon's vast expanse, with layered rock formations stretching as far as your eye can see. We struggled with even comprehending just the sheer vastness of what we were seeing. It is at an elevation of over 7,000 feet or 2,134 meters, and it offers one of the best perspectives of the canyon's depth, with the Colorado River faintly visible off in the distance.
Named after Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service, Mather Point serves as a tribute to his efforts in preserving national parks. Due to its proximity to parking and the visitor facilities, it can be crowded. But if you want to avoid the crowds, come in one of the lower seasons like at wintertime, which is when we were there. We also want to take a moment to recognize the tireless efforts of the National Park Service employees. If you disagree with the current efforts to cut funding for these parks, and the staff's tireless work to help protect these public lands, we will put some resources in the descriptions for how to take action and make your voice heard. We visited the visitor center to escape the cold for a few minutes. We then headed over to the park store and picked up our stamp. I should probably get a passport, but they always have little slips of paper, so I just collect them and throw them up on a corkboard when I get home.
The Grand Canyon is estimated to be around 5 to 6 million years old in its current form, with the Colorado River carving through layers of rock over time. However, the rock layers themselves are much, much older, with some of them even dating back nearly 2 billion years, making them among the oldest exposed rocks on Earth. Geologists believe that the canyon's formation was influenced by tectonic uplift, erosion, and river activity, gradually shaping the dramatic landscape that you see today. As we got close to sunset, we headed towards the Desert View Watchtower, a 70-foot, 21-meter stone tower built in 1932 by the architect Mary Coulter. The tower was designed to resemble an ancient ancestral Puebloan watchtower, with intricate murals inside painted by Hopi artist Fred Cabote. If we had arrived earlier in the day, we could have climbed to the top and explored its historic interior, which celebrates Native American culture and craftsmanship, but we'll have to save that for next time.
For sunset, we settled in at Moran Point, which offers a wide panoramic view of the canyon's depths and the Colorado River below. Named after the 19th century artist Thomas Moran, considered the artistic master of the conservation movement, he painted the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, and the Rocky Mountains, just to name a few. The next day we spent in Williams, close to our hotel, and explored Route 66. The town offers a nostalgic glimpse into America's Mother Road and the classic diners, neon signs, and vintage motels lining the historic stretch. Williams is known as the gateway to the Grand Canyon and was one of the last Route 66 towns to be bypassed by Interstate 40 in the 1980s. The town of Radiator Springs in the Pixar movie Cars was heavily inspired by several real-life Route 66 towns, including Williams, Arizona, and other towns along the historic highway. Williams shares many similarities with Radiator Springs, and like in Cars, the real-life town struggled economically after being bypassed by Interstate 40, but later saw a revival thanks to tourism and nostalgia.
For our last stop in the area, we spent a few hours at Arizona, a wildlife park that offers close-up encounters with North American animals in a drive-through and walk-through setting. The park spans 160 acres and features animals in their natural habitats. The drive-through section is the park's main attraction, kind of like a safari-style experience, but you drive your own vehicle or a rental vehicle through 3 miles of scenic wilderness. Along the route, you'll encounter a variety of North American wildlife, including black bears, bison, wolves, Rocky Mountain elk, mule deer, and bighorn sheep, all roaming freely in spacious natural enclosures. To ensure the safety of both you and the animals, you must keep the windows rolled up and stay inside your vehicles while driving through the predator areas. This included areas like the wolves and the bears. The bears are known to often walk near or even cross in front of vehicles, so you obviously have to drive slow and pay close attention.
Over half of the animals that call Arizona home at one point lived in the wild. For many different reasons, like human interactions or injuries, these animals are deemed non-releasable by state or federal wildlife agencies. Once they're there, they will spend the remainder of their lives in large, naturalistic enclosures, educating guests on what roles these different species play in the ecosystem and why it is important to keep wildlife wild. After the drive-through section, you park and start exploring Fort Arizona, a walkable area with smaller animals, a petting zoo, and a daily animal show. We caught the 2 p.m. show and got to see some of the enrichments for animals, including the Harris hawk, the trumpeter hornbill, crested sierramina named Chopsticks, and an adorable raccoon. Thanks for joining us on this journey out west. Next time we pick back up on the East Coast with a cruise on one of the newest cruise ships in the world, and we make a New Year's trip to Kentucky. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want YouTube to let you know when we share those adventures.
Thanks for watching!